And now I'd like to introduce Diane Farrell. This is the Women's Day, by the way, just as long as, just so that all of you know, right? Diane Farrell, who is the Deputy Undersecretary for International Trade. In this role, she plans, determines, and coordinates policy, directs the International Trade Administration, and oversees the daily operations of the ITA, which has an annual budget of $613 million with approximately 2,100 trade and investment professionals based in more than 100 cities and 70 markets around the world. Within the Department of Commerce, Diane Farrell also serves currently as co-chair of the Equity Council alongside Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Don Graves. Previously, Farrell worked at the U.S.-India Business Council. As Executive Vice President, she oversaw business advocacy, policy, and government relations. Farrell served on the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank of the United States before joining US IPC. Farrell holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in American Government from Wheaton College. Special Assistant Farrell.
Well, good morning. Sorry, good afternoon, and officially happy International Women's Day on Thursday, Chair Burns. So, so you're
making progress here. We're making
progress, and I'm thrilled to see my dear friend Monica Gorman, who was one of ours before she became one of the presidents at one of Lyle's across the street from our building. I'm really delighted and honored to be with you all today. Very excited. In fact, Chair Burns, I'm sure you don't remember, but the last time we met was on an Acela coming up from Washington to Stamford. So,
I do remember very well.
So not much changes. I guess the scenery hasn't changed too much for us over the years, but nevertheless, I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be with you today. So I have the task of sort of going a little bit more to the macro side, which is just to give you the update on the President's Export Council, as well as the release of the National Export Strategy. So I'll start with the PEC, as it's affectionately known, first, and I believe my colleague is going to put up just a list of the names of the individuals who have been named. There we go. Because I thought it would be of interest to all of you to see who effectively your counterparts are in another extraordinarily important and influential group. And of course, again, Chair Burns served in this capacity the last time there was a PAC, which might have been the last time we saw each other on the train, to be honest with you. It's been a while. Absolute congratulations to this committee. You weighed in, of course, with a recommendation to the president to reconstitute the PEC. They have been a very active, very influential force. I can certainly remember during the Obama administration when Penny Pritzker was our secretary, that there was a tremendous connectivity between the secretary's work, our work at Commerce, and the individuals representing industry across all spectrum. What's particularly significant here is that in addition to the private sector, you'll notice that there's labor and there's academia represented, which is frankly emblematic of the priorities of the Biden-Harris administration in terms of making sure that as we look to the future, and as one of my favorite expressions is, you know, all boats rise in a rising tide, all boats lift in a rising tide. We want to make sure that everyone is the beneficiary of what we see as opportunities going forward. And this moment in time, which I consider personally to be extremely unique, where we have a chance to get it right, to level set and to get it right. And that's, again, something that is an absolutely top priority of our secretary, as well as the president and the vice president. The only thing I want to say is we look at it's industry, it's business, it's agriculture, it's labor, and it's government. So the idea is that they are touching on all aspects of what we would call the ecosystem when we talk about our economy today and our aspirations for the future. They've effectively broken up the discussion into two areas that they sent as a recommendation to the president when they convened their very first meeting back in June, just a couple of months ago. The first is on on innovation and technology broadly, and the other is on trade facilitation. With regard to innovation and technology, they set about several priorities that they would like the president to focus on, and they would like to focus on as a group. The first is to align export promotion and development programs with place-based investments and competitiveness initiatives. The second is to increase capacity in manufacturing and address standards barriers, extremely important, to support and expand exports of technology-enabled services, to strengthen U.S. leadership in tech regulations, to establish an innovation and manufacturing coordinator, very consistent with a comment that was just made with Lael Brainerd. On trade facilitation, they would like the president to put out an executive order, a presidential memorandum or something similar to prioritize and coordinate trade facilitation efforts, including, and importantly, supply chain initiatives that would run across all federal agencies. And their next meeting will be in early December. So at that point, they'll have responses back from the White House, and this process will continue. Again, it was extremely impactful to have this group weighing in and making this recommendation. It was truly an affirmation to all of us who have been asking the administration to take this step forward and to recognize the value of making sure that the private sector at all levels and in all areas is specifically engaged. Now, not to overwhelm, so we will be sending you an email as soon as this meeting is over that will have a link to their website and to give you even more granular information as you may be interested. What's really neat about the discussion that I've already heard in the last hour plus is how it ties into the national export strategy. So if we could just show that slide very quickly. What I wanted to show you there is where the priority sectors are taking place. Before I go into those, just a couple of things. Number one, it's been 7 years since there's been a national export strategy. So this is truly a moment, again, where we have the opportunity to corral, however you want to describe it, collect all of the inputs from every interested sector, as we just discussed a few moments ago. What's really interesting about the NES is I'm showing you the priorities as it relates to sectoral, but the first chapter in this 94-page National Export Strategy is about data and analysis. It's the first thing that it actually, I'm just going to read you from the executive summary. Understanding the role of exports in the U.S. economy, including who is exporting, what is being exported and from where, the destination of exports, and the value added to our economy is an essential starting point for the NES. So everything that you all have discussed today is extremely affirmative to the interagency effort that this represents, because that's another thing that I wanted to underscore, because this is somewhat unique over the last few years. This effort, which took quite a while, was truly a collaboration from every single federal agency that would have an oar in the water when you talk about exporting, and that's just about every single U.S. agency. So this has been a very lengthy and detailed process that has resulted in this document. And again, we're going to send you the link so that you can take a look and you can just zip through chapters to see the areas that are of greatest interest. But I did want to mention data and analysis. The other one that is throughout is the Biden-Harris administration's focus and emphasis on equity. So admittedly, I do have a personal interest, and I'm very much working at the departmental level with our deputy secretary and the secretary on equity, both internally, but especially externally, so that we are engaging with the private sector. We are, walking the walk, talking the talk, doing all the things that we should be. And again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, making sure that we are not leaving anyone behind as we talk about how we rebuild, how we strengthen our supply chains, how we make sure that we are reaching underserved communities. That has been a major priority. So equity would be the second chapter that you're going to find in the National Export Strategy. Then we go to climate and clean technologies. Not surprisingly, this is all directed at the White House's commitment to net zero greenhouse gases by middle of this century. We, of course, very much look forward to the upcoming COP meeting that's going to be taking place in the fall. And again, in every area, there are so many opportunities for U.S. companies, as well as for continued, private sector as well as government sector interventions when we talk about how we're actually going to meet this incredibly important goal. So climate and clean technologies. Then we get to manufacturing, and what we're talking about there, your wheelhouse, supply chain resiliency, sustainability, digital transformation, trade finance, and again, a focus on technical standards development. Very essential as we talk about all of these new and burgeoning technologies and how they impact, again, our economic ecosystem. Travel and tourism, which is the exclusive responsibility of the Department of Commerce and also falls under Grant Harris's, Assistant Secretary Grant Harris's remit. We have the National Travel and Tourism Strategy. It doesn't need to be said that this is an area that was probably the most negatively impacted because of COVID-19. We can also talk about some of the other exogenous difficulties that we're facing. But for travel and tourism, there's a tremendous amount that is going on right now. And to a degree, it gets to job development program as well that came up earlier in terms of how we're going to celebrate the fact that we have a low unemployment rate, but continue to think about either attracting investment or expanding investment when we talk about having a low unemployment rate. So travel and tourism is an opportunity for us in that area, which segues nicely to international education. This is not an area that people think about. When you say export, you don't think international education. And yet, this is one of our most significant, most popular, and most successful export opportunities. And not only does it pay dividends in terms of the duration of a student and the tuition that's generated by that student's presence in the United States, it has everything to do with our ability to continue to move our innovation systems forward. So international education is a very important focus, and again, gets its own chapter. Global infrastructure development, we could have a zillion little dots under global infrastructure development there, but not surprisingly, what we're talking about is infrastructure and investment financing, and there are some very interesting areas where we are again trying to work with the private sector and within the boundaries of what's allowable as our government continues to move forward to want to incentivize this kind of development. There's a lot there that can be looked at that we hope, frankly, can also be helpful for the small and medium-sized enterprises, that we aren't just talking about the giant companies who also are important to us because of the subcontracting that they do. But nevertheless, again, going into the underdeveloped areas, going into areas that have been overlooked to make sure that we are providing as much opportunity there as we can. You heard about the Indo-Pacific Framework for Prosperity, or more affectionately known as IPEF. I believe you're going to be hearing from my colleague Sharon Yuan in just a moment. This is a really exciting venture. It is very forward-leaning in terms of how we're recognizing the fact that 10 years of negotiations toward trade agreements are really not very realistic or practical. For one thing, given the pace of innovation change, it would be very difficult. Furthermore, as our countries, as our trading partners continue to refine their areas of interest and priority, it's not worth getting stuck on areas where we're probably never really going to move the needle. It's more important to identify those areas of common interest and how we can move forward with an initiative in a constructive way. And I think that's what you're hearing from the Secretary when she talks about her upcoming visit next week and wanting to identify those areas, especially when we talk about commerce, where we can continue to maintain a competitive relationship without it becoming completely side-railed by very important, but geopolitical issues that don't directly impact our ability to continue to grow our economies back into good health post COVID. So then after that, we've got another one that you may or may not have heard of is the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. This is something that was kicked off by Secretaries Blinken and Raimondo almost 2 years ago now. This is specifically to deal with some of the questions that have been lingering between ourselves and our trading partners and allies in Europe. It is affectionately known, again, everybody's got an acronym, right? This one is the TTC. So you can read more about that, but again, terribly important as we talk about the march of technology and our ability to ensure that we have open data opportunities, that we are ensuring privacy, very important. We want to make sure that we're in alignment on that with our partners, but we also don't want to be hamstrung when it comes to our ability to be competitive. Then we go to agriculture, fish, and forestry. Certainly you can weave climate into that, but for those who are in those industries, we all know that there are some very complex market barriers that also have to be addressed. But all of this is against the impact, of course, of what's happened with climate change. And then seafood industries, a very important industry, again, with highly technical and complex regulations, competitive decisions that are being made on behalf of industry, protecting certain industries, national industries. And so it's an area that gets its own chapter, that deserves its own discussion, and one where, again, we see great opportunities when we talk about the U.S. companies and our trading partners overseas. So not surprisingly, and you've already heard all of this mentioned, everything here also has a foundation that's based in the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, in the Inflation Reduction Act, and certainly in the CHIPS and Science Act. So what's so wonderful about this plan, I mean, I probably sound like overly geeky or wonky about this, but I feel like we finally got everything in one place, at least for today. And I know, Ursula, you're giving me the hook, and I'm happy to say.
No, I'm not hooking you. I'm actually agreeing.
Even better. Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
I mean, this is
okay.
It's complete, and it focuses on two areas when I was on the PEC that we tried to get into but didn't. One is travel and tourism. We worked there, and the other one, which we didn't touch at all, international education. Unbelievably fruitful for us, and we don't spend enough attention or time on it. So I'm really excited about the whole PEC and about the fact that we're moving this forward. The team looks great as well. So
I am so glad that
engaged. This
well, we will.
That group, yeah.
So here, and as you know, I mean, there, so, the way, some of the federal committees go, we have to be your conduit, as evidenced by the fact that we passed along the original recommendations to reconstitute the PEC. So we encourage this group particularly to give us your feedback, give us your suggestions. You've got Nima, you've got Grant, you've got a lot of good people who can do that. And frankly, with your background in terms of having served previously, you know what the PEC is capable of. And I think you also know how this committee can be particularly influential. So I thank you very, very much. And as I say, it's been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing all of the feedback and all the commentary from members as well as my colleagues in the administration.
Thank you, Undersecretary Farrell. Any questions for the Undersecretary? Kudos, whatever. I love the work. So, and as you know, I'm a little bit of a geek in this area too. So any questions or comments?
And as I mentioned, check your inboxes because you're going to get a copy of the strategy and the most recent updates on the PEC so that you can read at your leisure.
Jeff.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Undersecretary Farrell, for your work and your remarks. I would like to call out Gene Soroka for his consistent push from the very beginning, the constitution of this committee, for more focus on exports, and lots of support from Ursula, given her prior leadership at PEC. Now I'd like to introduce David Crane, who's the Undersecretary for Infrastructure at the Department of Energy. Prior to his confirmation, he served as Director of DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. Outside of government, he was the CEO of Climate Real Impact Solutions and served on the boards of Heliogen, Source Global, JERA Company, and Tata Steel, along with several not-for-profit boards. Previously, he was CEO of NRG. During his 12-year tenure there, he took NRG from Chapter 11 to a Fortune 200 company. He also led NRG to the forefront of next-generation clean energy development through large-scale initiatives in utility-scale renewables, which is now Clearway, residential solar, post-combustion carbon capture, which is Petronova, and DC fast charging at EVGO. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School and Princeton University. It's my honor to welcome David Crane.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for all that. It's you get old enough, the bio gets longer. So it's an honor for me to be here with the advisory committee, and if it's I was told I should take about 10 minutes just to tell you what we're up to in this regard. Is that still the timing? Is that good? 10 minutes, and then they said there might be some questions, but. First of all, I want to say this is an auspicious day for us to join you because just today we're releasing a study called the Supply Chain Progress Report, which was produced by our Manufacturing and Supply Chain Office, and so I encourage everyone to get it. As you would imagine, it's a 30-some page report, but it focuses on the opportunities we have, the capacity we have to assist in terms of manufacturing capabilities. First, also the related question of workforce for staffing these factories, and then of course the need to build up our analytic capability. And I would say that we've been focusing under supply chain as part of our sort of expanded mandate under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And to me, as a person who spent my career in the private sector, this is all about, a relatively new embrace by the government of industrial policy, or as I like to call it, given the amount of financial resources that we have to deploy, I like to call it applied industrial policy. And again, I think the strategic aspect of this for us in the energy sector, which is obviously a strategic industry, is, having spent the better part of my career in the energy industry and dealing as an American with the country's dependence on foreign sources of oil since the 1970s. Nobody wants to substitute dependence on foreign manufacturing around new energy technologies, as the replacement for a strategic vulnerability as we had with imported oil for so long. I was going to talk a little bit about how we've organized ourselves at the DOE in this area. I did want to, give a couple of qualifiers to begin with. Obviously, we're the Department of Energy, so when we talk about supply chains, when we talk about manufacturing, when we talk about competitiveness, we're talking about competitiveness in the world of energy, and particularly clean energy. I would note that we in the bills that we implement define clean energy pretty broadly. So I would say clean energy as it shows up in industrial commodities. One of I think our unique pots of money is we have $6 billion to invest in decarbonizing the so-called hard to abate sectors, steel, concrete, cement, aluminum, and others. And so it's not purely energy, but also industrial commodities. And also we have certain buckets of money that are aimed at the auto manufacturing and supply chain, batteries, conversion of manufacturing facilities in the United States. So those are the areas that we're focused on in terms of export and competitiveness, not as much consumer goods. The other thing I would say is that we have a lot of capital to deploy at the Department of Energy, something like $90 billion between the two acts, but it's not particularly flexible capital. Most of it financial assistance, which is basically 50%. The government provides up to 50% cost share. I tend to call our cost share, because I'm a private sector person, equity. I just call it free equity. It's like equity. It's just we don't require any return on capital or return of capital. But the various provisions, the various buckets of money are in a lot of cases prescribed in quite a bit of detail by the statute. And so if I were a king for a day and could improve things around here, I would have gone for capital that would allow us to play in different parts of the capital stack, in maybe more hybrid areas. But having said that, the money we have can make a big difference. The other thing that I would say is one of the offices that reports to me, the Loan Program Office, is part of the legislation. Their ability to extend credit now across their 5 different authorizations is $400 billion. And so, the Loan Program Office also doesn't work on this. They have a rolling admission process as opposed to the set piece solicitations that most of our other programs have. So, we have a big focus here on increasing awareness about what the Loan Program Office can do for the private sector, and also a big focus on making it more user friendly. So just a few more words about the DOE. Because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the department was reorganized rather substantially to better implement that legislation. What that led to was the creation of the vertical that I lead. I'm the first ever permanent undersecretary for infrastructure. Our vertical sits alongside the Science and Innovation Undersecretariat, which runs the 17 national labs. And I wanted to emphasize that we still utilize the unrivaled technical expertise of the 17 national labs in what we do. And we think in terms of dealing with the private sector, the fact that we've harnessed the expertise of the national labs, for our commercial ends, is quite useful. I would say that the driving force behind this reorganization was that typically demonstration projects, which have been done at the DOE for a long time, the DOE limited its mission to demonstrating hardware at scale. It did not particularly matter to the DOE historically whether those big demonstration projects were commercially viable, as long as they proved that they could produce something at a certain cost, and at a certain scale. What's different now is that the demonstration projects we're doing are not supposed to be demonstrate and then dismantle. They're supposed to be pillars for the economy going forward. So in that regard, I want to specifically mention a couple offices. We have an Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. They're administering $26 billion of funds to be deployed. Most of their money is designated against individual technologies. So they have $8 billion to put into hydrogen hubs. They have $7 billion to put into a series of carbon capture and demonstration projects. The $6 billion to go into industrial decarbonization, like I mentioned before. $2.5 billion to go into advanced modular nuclear reactor projects. And then $500 million to go into long duration energy storage projects. So there's that office. And then there's, as I mentioned, the manufacturing supply chain office. They've already had successful solicitations that have led to, I think, 23 battery factories being built across the countries, but they have other, they're about to announce a second round of battery factories. They also have manufacturing conversion grants and a series of other programs that will help us, increase manufacturing in areas of need across the energy supply chain. I mean, that's sort of an overview of where we're at. I mean, Jeff, I'm happy to take any questions or or not.
That sounds great, David. Thank you, and thanks for your leadership on all of this. The wealth of private sector experience that you bring is invaluable in guiding our policy here. So thank you. Anybody have a question for Undersecretary Crane?
I can start off, Jeff. David, good to see you again. This is Revati. It's been a while since we talked, so congratulations on your confirmation. It's a fun job you have. It's just to give away a lot of money. So I like that. On the, one of the areas we're seeing, some interesting juxtaposition of what's happening is with, developing residential solar in the US. A lot of work has gone, money has gone from IRA for manufacturing in the US. And so, string inverters, storage, and all of that is going really well. So we're seeing a lot of development in terms of manufacturing initiatives across that. I don't know what can be done, but the challenge tends to be is interest rates high, right? The financials don't start to make sense anymore in terms of residential solar business. So you're seeing kind of the development of manufacturing that is going on, but a huge pause in terms of the residential solar business. I'm not sure all that falls into kind of your purview, but I think it's an interesting place to be, different in the utility scale, as you're well aware, because that's less impacted in terms of the overall returns with interest rates. But it, being in the middle of kind of seeing the benefits of IRA in the country, we're also seeing kind of the opposing impact of what happens with interest rates going up. So I don't know if you have any comments on it, or if you've heard much of this, or if any of this falls into kind of what you're looking at today.
Well, Revati, first of all, it's great to see you, and thank you for all you do from the private sector side. It's interesting that you mentioned this. It's a point that that I've been turning to. I mean, you mentioned things that are happening in distributed solar. One of the interesting things, and I think a sign of the accomplishment of what I'm focused on in this job, is I have actually very, very little money to put directly into solar or wind, because they're considered mature technologies now. But the dynamic that you're talking about, where in pursuit of decarbonization and a future of reliable domestic clean energy in this country, we're about to embark on a capital spend the likes of which the country's never seen. But oh, by the way, money has suddenly become very expensive for the private sector. And in most of my programs, as I mentioned, the private sector has to put up at least half of that money. I've been trying to spread that word internally within the government that, in this interest rate environment, not only that is money expensive, but my sense, you tell me that, that the private sector, from a point of view of major construction projects, is a little bit in a risk-off posture right now with the scarcity of labor and the inflation in underlying commodities. That it's not, we can award the money, which, as you say, can be fun, but we still have to work with the private sector to make sure that we're creating a situation where they're willing to put up their money. And where we've been focused, and you would see, our fingerprints and things like what we've announced about the hydrogen demand side, which is, there's nothing I can do about underlying interest rates, but I think in terms of third-party private sector financing, my experience is that Wall Street will finance the creation of products where they see a ready market to buy those products, whether it's long-term contract or otherwise. And so we've been very focused on the demand side as an indirect way to try and bring the cost of money down on the private sector side. I think that's the best answer I've got for you, but it is an issue.
I think that's a good conversation to have. Like you said, if the cost of capital is high, then distributing the money becomes harder because private sector is not going to put the money in. I think that makes sense. Can I just ask you a second question, since I have you on there, is as you're giving away the money, there's been a lot of conversation about who you partner up with, which countries and which companies, particularly around battery manufacturing. Any points of view on kind of, what is the, we obviously want to partner in developing these technologies with the best available technology in the world. And as you listen to this conversation, any views on, as you're looking at all the, giving away the money, are there any kind of handcuffs around, where the technology comes from or how that is deployed, and your philosophy around that?
You're really trying to get me in trouble. What I would say is certain of the battery manufacturing awards, which was a selection that was sort of made before my time, went to recipients which, it was determined it wasn't in the interest of the U.S. government or the U.S. taxpayer to support that. And, there's now, in subsequent to the battery manufacturing, there's a very, very thorough vetting process that we go through. And Revati, without putting too fine a point on it, I would just say that, it's definitely not, it's not part of the Department of Energy's desire to create vulnerabilities to either foreign technical know-how or foreign ownership from countries that are not seen as close allies to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, David. Hey, appreciate it. Look forward to working with you in your new role.
Willie's got his hands up. Willie?
Yeah, David, first of all, thank you for coming today. And, DOE has sponsored a lot of research work. I call out ARPA-E for doing a lot of good things in terms of critical minerals and so on. And I think this session was oriented around critical minerals. I was wondering if you had some thoughts. We've seen a lot of new process innovations, on non-traditional ways of extracting lithium, like out of the Salton Sea. We see ExxonMobil has this project in Arkansas now to extract from brines. And I wonder if you had some thoughts on that you could share.
Well, Willie, I've sort of focused, I sit at the far commercial end of the DOE, like I was mentioned with Revati, where, we're giving out multi-hundred million, if not billion-dollar awards in the hopes that the private sector will put up an equal amount. So, it's very important to me that the people that greenlight the projects on the other side, having put my former CEO hat on, the last thing a CEO that, is being asked to put $1 billion into a facility wants to hear that it's unproven technology, right? So I sit at the demonstration end. There are very robust programs with good funding under these bills within the R&D side, which of course is the 17 national labs and the applied science offices. And I would say the examples you're talking about would be supported by those offices. The challenges for my end of the DOE are working closely with them so that, as we sit here in 2023, we don't lean so far into what's proven technology that basically in 2023, we're putting 20th century technology, out into the field, because we all know this infrastructure is going to be there for 50, 60, 70 years. And so that's what we're trying to work out is, our stuff needs to be, commercially, financeable, but we want to incorporate the latest technologies. But if it's really cutting edge may not work, then, we need to have robust fallback plans so that, we don't suddenly end up with multi-billion dollar stranded assets. And in this area, we focus on things like electrolyzers and things like that, new age electrolyzers. I don't know that was a good answer to your question, but that's the best I got.
No, I think that's sensible. I mean, because one of the things the committee recommended was that Commerce should really look at some of these major process innovations, which had the opportunity to change the game on traditional extraction methodologies or metal reduction. I mean, for example, there is a mature technology in direct reduction iron, and the U.S. is a very slow adopter in that, even though it's proven, in most of the rest of the world. So we got a sense of your answer. Thank you so much.
Willie, if I could say one other thing too is, one of the challenges is because of this is taxpayer money, so all these things are competition, acute focus on level playing field competition done in secret. So we set up these competitions as a one-on-one competition, but we're also supposed to be looking at portfolio effect. And I've been trying to mention to people is like when we look at a spectrum across industrial decarbonization, if every single project that we finance succeeds, then we didn't take enough risk. But the evaluation process is not really designed to say, okay, here's a bucket, here's some super risky ones with a high reward, here's less risky ones with an incremental reward. So we're trying to achieve that portfolio effect, but I have to say it's a little difficult in government because the nature of the process, and here at the DOE, there's still what's known as the Solyndra effect. From 10 years ago.
Right. No, but I think that's exactly right. You do want to have that diversity in the risk portfolio. So that's a good approach. But like you say, it's a very challenging one. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have a question. I have a comment, Undersecretary. I am pleased with the bounce back of the DOE and being an active partner in one of the most important, active partner, you guys are the owner of one of the most important future assets that we have, and you guys have come back roaring. I just stepped down from the board of ExxonMobil, so I saw some of the input, output, and it's just, I think, good work, so keep it up.
Oh, well, Ursula, if I could just comment, I think one of the things that I see as a huge virtue of this next stage of technologies that are incented in these two bills is the fact that it plays to the skill sets of the conventional energy companies. I mean, what was ExxonMobil's Chevron going to do with a solar panel? I mean, it was like, it was way too low tech, but between carbon capture and hydrogen, the possibility of repurposing existing infrastructure, we very much welcome the conventional players, digging in deep with us.
Any other questions for the Undersecretary for Infrastructure? If not, thank you, Undersecretary Crane. Now I'd like to introduce Sharon Wan, who is the Counselor and Chief Negotiator for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF. She joined the Department of Commerce in May of 2022. And she works alongside counterparts in partner countries to deepen US economic engagement in the region and strengthen the economic competitiveness of the United States and other framework partners. Juan brings more than 20 years of experience as both a senior policymaker and private sector attorney. She received a Juris Doctorate from the University of Virginia Law School and received a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics from UC Berkeley. Welcome, Counselor and Chief Negotiator Sharon Wan. Are you on already? I hope so, because I just did your introduction.
Yes, sorry, I
Great.
realized I'm on. twice.
Mute.
So I started talking and realized I was still on mute. Well, thank you so much, Ursula, and thanks to everyone for being here today and for the invitation. I thought I would just quickly follow up on some of the remarks that the Secretary made at the top about the work that we are doing through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. As you may or may not know, this is a key initiative for the Biden administration as part of our broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And really, this is a cornerstone of the economic component, because ultimately, if we are to be able to engage geostrategically with these partners, we need to have a robust economic component to it. And from our perspective, here at the Department of Commerce, we are working with these partners, these 13 other countries, to really deepen our economic engagement and collaboration. And remember, at the time that the president launched this in May of 2022 in Tokyo with his counterpart leaders, we were still kind of reeling from a massive global pandemic, experiencing massive, different supply chain shocks. And from our perspective, really looking to reinsert ourselves into the region. And what's been really quite remarkable, as you all see day in, day out, on the ground, is how much, these countries, want the U.S. to be present, to be engaged. And we likewise, view this region as critically important to our longer term economic competitiveness. So in that regard, we are working through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which, partners are starting to view as a club, which is, fantastic, right? This grouping where we're going to be able to work on a host of discrete issues, starting with the supply chain agreement, which the Secretary and her counterpart ministers were able to announce substantial conclusion of the negotiations at the end of May earlier this year in Detroit. And, it's really quite remarkable. It is first time we've had an international agreement of this sort, with these 14 countries, where we are going to, come together and be able to share experiences, to work, through the Supply Chain Council, this new body that we've created, to be able to collaborate, to share information, to really dig in on, topics, including sectors as we go forward. I mean, I should flag that the agreement itself is sector agnostic, because we recognize just how unique each sector, each good will be. But rather what we will do is, as partners together, we will decide, which areas, which sectors we want to be able to go deeper and really start to collaborate further as we go. There's also a crisis response network that we've established, which will essentially, kind of, as I like to call it, a phone a friend option. But in the case of a crisis, an emergency, where partners will be able to come to a body and ask for support and assistance, with ultimately no strings attached. And then finally, we have the Labor Rights Advisory Board, so a tripartite body consisting of government, private sector, and labor, to be able to not only work on workforce development issues, obviously the workers are the backbones of our supply chains, but also to be able to address labor rights issues, which we ultimately recognize are going to be critical to achieving our objectives of supply chain resiliency. As the Secretary mentioned, the kind of phenomenal work that Grant and his team are doing, standing up this supply chain resiliency office. But it is remarkable. We're not the only ones in our IPEF countries that, do not have that kind of point of contact. And during the course of these negotiations, which, we were able to get done in 6 months' time, with 14 countries, that's pretty remarkable. But nonetheless, even during the course of the negotiations, whether in the U.S. government, but also with our partner countries, we have had to really bring together the various, departments, agencies, ministries that have equities as it relates to supply chains across the board. And now we've identified and will be identifying points of contact for us as we go forward. So even being able through this negotiations to have each government, each country be able to organize within their countries, but as we move forward to be able to have those points of contact will be remarkable. I mean, just think about if we had that during the pandemic, how much faster, easier some of the challenges that we encountered would have been. But to be very clear, the work is only now beginning. And the benefits ultimately for each of the partner countries, including the United States, really will be about the efforts and work that we are going to be putting into the agreement to continue the work, in these various bodies, and to be able to continue to work with the private sector in particular, where our supply chains sit, to really be able to incorporate how we're going to tackle this together. But we've got very supportive, like-minded partners here that want to be able to use this. They're very eager to start implementing the agreement. And just so you know, right now, we announced substantial conclusion at the end of May. We've been doing a legal scrub of the agreement because it is ultimately an international agreement, and partners are beginning their domestic processes to get that agreement approved, ratified, accepted, depending on their legal system. So our hope is to be able to share that text with you all, with all of our domestic stakeholders very soon. But then really to begin all that work. And partners are already talking about implementation, which is a bit of a new, kind of thing. Ultimately, we're always, hoping that we'll get to implementation, that we're going to push on it. But here, partners are really eager to do so. And in fact, in the last negotiating round in Korea, our Korean colleagues hosted a symposium where we were able to continue to talk about monitoring, about the role of labor. We are looking in the upcoming rounds to be able to continue to share information and knowledge. And really, this is just emblematic of what IPEF can be. And I'd be remiss to say, I know it's not necessarily the mandate of this group, but I do know it has interest for all of you, particularly given that last conversation that was just had. But we are also working on a clean economy pillar, which is focusing on capturing the opportunities as countries continue to transition to cleaner economies, as well as Pillar 4, which is on the fair economy, where we're focusing on tax and anti-corruption and being able to ensure that level playing field for all our companies. At the end of the day, a big focus of what we're doing in all three pillars is around investment and being able to help facilitate investment. But with that, it will require steps on the part of partners, and they seem eager to do so. And so we'll look forward to working with you as we go forward in that regard. So maybe with that, I'll stop now, but also happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Councillor Wan. Any questions regarding IPEF?
I have one, Jeff. It's maybe not a question, but a little bit more of a comment. It's a question as well. Is there any additional ways that we can engage more directly with your group? It seems that we do speak about it a lot in all of the subcommittee, all of the work that we do, but it's not clear that we have the right connectivity. And from your point of view, do we? And if not, how can we improve that?
It's a great question. Look, I think that we can always work on and improve and have greater coordination and communication. That is something that we continue to strive for. We engage with stakeholders as much as we can. We've done the Federal Register notice. We do stakeholder engagements before every negotiating round. We do engagements during the rounds as well, particularly for those host country stakeholders. But happy to talk with folks at any point time. And so you can always reach myself or anyone on my team as we are looking to shape the negotiations, but also increasingly as we go forward and as we implement agreements, as we conclude them, including the supply chain agreement, we will continue to reach out and are willing to engage, including with this group here, to really get insights into how we can use and make the agreement most meaningful and helpful for all of you. And I know that once you see the text, well, you're likely to have more questions in some respects, but also then we can also have more of a specific and concrete discussion as well about how we can further shape the agreement. The one thing I will say about IPEF is that in particular, the supply chain agreement and some of the other pillars that we're working on here at Commerce is that it is not your traditional trade agreement. And in many instances, we have the ability to shape this as we go. We have tremendous flexibility. Just based on the last conversation, I'll note, for instance, that in the clean economy pillar, one of the big areas that we're focused on is the ability to enter into work programs with the other IPEF partners. And so in Detroit, for instance, we announced a work program on clean hydrogen supply chains. And so there, again, our limitation on ability to be creativity is really kind of our lack of creativity. And so we spend a lot of time talking to all stakeholders, and you in particular have great ideas based on the work that you're already doing on the ground, experiences that you have. And so we would absolutely welcome any views that you may have through recommendations through this grouping, but also on a company or other association kind of organization basis.
Looks like Jason has a question.
Thanks, Jeff. One of the questions I had regarding IPAF was trade facilitation, and how are you thinking about the issue of trade facilitation? One of the things we've talked a lot about in this committee is that there are kind of two parts to the supply chain. There's the manufacturing and inputs part, and then the freight transportation part. Some of the countries that are included in IPAF are notorious for having very opaque customs regimes. And we've seen a lot of success out of USMCA and Chapter 7 and the trade facilitation provisions that were within there. Whatever the rules are, easing the free movement of trade once it is established. So if you could comment on that, that'd be great.
That's a great question. So two things. First is that I should note that a big part of IPEF is also the trade pillar, which my USTR colleagues is leading. And in that pillar, there is a full chapter on trade facilitation that is being addressed. We have worked very closely with our counterparts over at USTR, particularly those that are working on the trade facilitation piece, to make sure that what we were doing in the supply chain agreement is complementary to and supportive of the ongoing work that is being done there. So it sounds like you're quite familiar with our trade facilitation chapters in our traditional trade agreements. And so, think of that as well as then, kind of holistically, a whole agreement that just focuses on supply chains, including the logistics component to it, which of course is critical. So, we are addressing that as well in the supply chain agreement, and we anticipate that there will be more to come in that context. In terms of kind of the opaqueness, I mean, I will tell you that just the amount of information sharing that has taken place even during the negotiations. You've got several IPEF partners that are really good. Whether it be monitoring, whether it be in the area of logistics. And so that's really kind of one of the benefits and uniqueness of this agreement, which is at the end of the day, it's bringing together a very diverse group of countries, right? From the Fijis of the world to, the developed economies, but each with their own strengths, but also their own characteristics, right? Being an island nation, being, kind of wholly dependent on trade, to those that, are, much more advanced. And so that information sharing is taking place, and we are working to try to help facilitate that. One of the areas, that we announced in May, actually in Detroit, when we concluded the agreement, is that we are going to be working with our IPEF countries for which there are not mutual recognition agreements in place. So CBP is going to be, kind of prioritizing that, focusing on that. I recognize that this will not be a quick exercise by any means, but it is an area of importance and focus for not only us, but for our partners. So that will be an area going forward where we would, of course, welcome, kind of more detailed recommendations, areas of specificity where we might be able to further make progress.
Thank you for that. Stu?
Yeah, Sharon, I just invite you to stay on a little longer because one of our requests from the Data Innovation Technology Subcommittee is have you come in and talk to us. We're doing a lot of work, talking about, for example, the electronics industry and the moving out of the PC supply chain from China, where it's very concentrated today, into IPEF countries. But there's a lot of work going on that seems disconnected from the work that IPEF is doing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during our subcommittee presentation, if you wouldn't mind staying.
Well, I'm happy to do that and would welcome additional conversations. And, kind of the beauty of this process as we go forward is that, you will also start to really talk to the USG experts, including Grant and his team. We are, getting an opportunity now as we move from the negotiations into implementation to really start to, make more concrete and substantial this. And so, there's I will be the first, and I'm the least expert here for sure. But to say that, there's a lot of threads going on. There's a lot of work within the U.S. government on this. And even in the case of IPEF, we needed to start somewhere. And so, to be very clear, this is, an important step in, kind of our efforts, both kind of within the U.S. government to really try to, kind of coordinate our own work, but also with our partners. And so, of course, we're doing it all at the same time. And as, described during the negotiations, we were essentially, building the plane as we were landing it. And so that's a little bit of how IPEF feels. But I think it's actually potentially quite exciting for us. And, we've got a great secretary to help move us forward. And, with your all's assistance, I think we can, really make some progress.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Wan, I had a question. This is Jeff. As I think about this negotiating challenge you have, it seems to me that understanding the interests of each member of IPEF is going to be pretty critical in getting to an agreement. And I'm wondering if the team has a really good map of the critical imports for each country and for the bloc as a whole, because I could imagine that there's one set of things people I would suspect are going to be pretty focused on, protecting the things that or getting access to the things that are most critical to their economy that they don't have. To the extent that those can be satisfied by other partners, it's obviously a lower barrier than things that need to be imported to the bloc as a whole. So is there a really good characterization of those import flows that you're working off of to understand the interests of each party?
So, the great thing is that we've got a really, kind of willing group of partners, number one. But then number two, we've got a fantastic group of experts, here at the Department of Commerce, in Grant's team. So we spent a lot of time with the economists, and they've been, really kind of mapping out, and as well as, kind of Grant's industry team to make sure that we do have that bigger picture. I will say that one of the challenges of the agreement was, how do we design this in a way that is forward-looking? The Secretary talked about baby formula, obviously chips remains top of mind, but you never know, right? What will be the crisis 3, 5, 7 years down the road? And whether it is pharmaceuticals or whether it is, chemicals or, whether it's an auto part, you just never know what it's going to be. And of course, each sector, each good has a very unique set of challenges and supply chain, characteristics to it. So some people may be surprised, when they look at the agreement and they're not going to see anything about semiconductors in there, like explicitly referenced, or it's not going to say, name your product. But the actual design of it is to ensure that this agreement is durable, that it allows us to be flexible and reactive and responsive, and importantly, Jeff, I think to your point, is to be able to reflect where each country actually has its most important set of demands and products. So the design of the agreement is actually such that each country will come up with its list of critical sectors and goods that will then allow for us to kind of then bring partners together and to be able to then go much deeper as would be required to really be able to address and ensure that we identify vulnerabilities and potential risks and shocks as we go forward. So that's kind of all part of the work to come, including the data piece that will be so important in understanding, what each country is looking for. So, not only will working with, USG experts be important, but candidly, your all's input will be critical.
Thank you. Any other questions from
I think we have Mara Lee's hands up.
Hi, this is Mara Lee from International Trade Today. My question was, I saw the announcement from the summit of the Korean and Japanese leaders about supply chains, and I just wondered, how is that different from the supply chain agreement that y'all already reached through IPEF?
So let me just say, I think that, obviously the trilateral is a smaller subset with 3 partners. But, Commerce has, ongoing work with, many different countries, not just all IPEF countries, as it relates to trying to build supply chain resiliency. Yes, the uniqueness of IPEF, being able to bring together 14 countries to really focus on supply chain resiliency is critically important, but also at the end of the day, many supply chains are not going to be just focused on one region. It may be broader. And so we're going to continue to do that work. Ultimately, the idea being that each of our different dialogues and channels and efforts are all kind of working towards a similar objective and set of goals. But again, recognizing the uniqueness of partners, priorities, and different demands. What I will just say that in the context of IPEF is that it's kind of a unique opportunity for us, with such a large grouping to be able to work together on the full range of issues. Again, from kind of workforce development, labor rights protection, to the logistics, to the data, to in the event of a crisis.
Thank you, and thank you for that catch from our Ursula. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Councilor Wan, and thank you for your service in helping negotiate this incredibly important agreement. Before I introduce Stu Pan for a subcommittee update, Grant Harris would like to take a few minutes right now to get some feedback on a timely topic. Grant?
Great, thanks so much. I was hoping before going to the specific subcommittee updates to just hit a couple of points that have come up in the form of questions and also put on offer additional information in that regard too. There are just 3 quick points which I wanted to make. First is that there have been a lot of great questions and comments on encouraging and incentivizing data sharing. Willie, you made one as well. Stu, you raised related topics and also invoked Revathi's work too. And Ursula, you had a great suggestion about a particular model related to finance. And I've been talking with Dr. Gorman offline, and we were both considering with the team, this would be a place where it would be uniquely powerful and impactful to have your thoughts and recommendations. I don't know if it's come up in the data subcommittee or might be forthcoming, because by FACA rules, I don't have access to draft recommendations or anything until they come to this body. But whether they have or have not, we would really welcome specific recommendations in how the US government can play a role in encouraging data sharing and what models we might look at, what the priorities we should think about and metrics of success, and how to navigate some of the challenges that have been raised too, including privacy and issues that companies might have about their own data, of course. The second issue that I wanted to raise is the Secretary, of course, talked about a few specific points on which we would love feedback. IPEF, including what you heard from Councilor Yuan in more detail, we would really welcome thoughts on how to make it as impactful as possible, especially for the private sector. the Commerce Supply Chain Center, which the Secretary has talked about and I spoke about earlier, India, which she spoke to as well. And then there was one additional one that she'd wanted added to the list that I wanted to take a moment on, and that the department here is home to the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and various manufacturing institutes. And as some of you may know, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership is a public-private partnership with centers in all 50 states and Puerto Rico that support small and medium-sized manufacturers. And in June, our NIST colleagues here at Commerce awarded more than $20 million dedicated to supply chain optimization and innovation to create a network, including to support these SMEs, but also to improve data sharing as well, and also improve visibility into the supply chain. We would really welcome suggestions on how to make the MEPs and the manufacturing institutes as impactful as possible. So we wanted to just add that to the list of a place where we think your feedback could be uniquely helpful. And third and finally, Dawn and others, you'd ask questions about Commerce's work in matchmaking and advocacy and finding the right markets. We can add to that in the subcommittee if you want to have more information on it. And Ursula and others, you'd ask questions about CHIPS in particular. We're happy to invite Mike Schmidt, the head of our CHIPS office here in Commerce, or others to come speak, or our global markets colleagues to provide more information on any of these specific questions that have come up. So please let us know if these are priorities that you'd like us to take on board and offer follow-up discussions on. Thanks, Jeff, for carving out another few minutes for me. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Grant. It was super helpful. And it's again, as we've been trying to do for the last year, narrowing down our focus to areas that we think have real chance of being implemented and that can help our colleagues in the government to set policy and make the best use of the funds that have already been appropriated is hugely helpful. So we'll try to use those as guardrails as we continue to narrow down our focus. So I'm